Good day, Africa, and welcome to another exciting edition of AAU Talks. And AAU Talks is brought to you by the Association of African Universities headquarters here in Accra, Ghana. And today we are so much excited because we have one of our renowned and one of the greatest professors in the areas of STEM in the studio. And we are going to discuss a very important subject which is of a national and continental interest. And I know you are also interested in knowing what we are discussing today. But don't forget that you can join the discussion via our social media platforms, Association of African Universities on Facebook and AAU_67 on Twitter. Most of you may have heard STEM, and that is science, technology, engineering and mathematics, and that is what we are discussing today, how the diasporans will be able to contribute to the scientific knowledge and discourse of Africa. We'll go for a short break, and when we return, I will let you know my guest. Stay tuned.
The Association of African Universities, in partnership with the All African Students Union and Al-Azhar University, Egypt, calls on African universities to participate in the first African Universities Olympics. Theme: Uniting African Universities through sports and recreation, mapping out strategies to achieve the Africa we want. The disciplines include basketball, football, long jump, triple jump, shot put, javelin, sprints, and a whole lot more. The teams will be formed according to the 5 geopolitical regions of Africa, namely West, East, South, North, and Central Africa. Venue: Al-Azhar University, Cairo, Egypt. Date: 14th to 18th of March 2019. Register now on blog.aau.org and also stand the chance of visiting the pyramids of Giza and other interesting sites in Cairo. For more information, visit blog.aau.org or call +233 2432 98464.
Welcome back from the break, and you are still watching AAU Talks here on AAU TV, and my name is Kwesi Sam. Before we went on the break, I told you we are going to discuss STEM and how African diasporans will be able to contribute to the scientific knowledge in Africa. And we are privileged to have Professor Mkem Khumbah, and he is a senior fellow, and he is also, he was a curator for the Next Einstein Forum. And today we are privileged to have him in our midst, and he's going to tell us more about the STEM policies in Africa and how we will be able to achieve everything that we have put together to achieve as a continent. We are so much privileged to have you in our studios, Prof.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Great. Prof, I know this is not your first time coming to Ghana.
Not at all. Ghana is almost like my second home in Africa.
Sure.
I was born in Cameroon, and I lived there through high school before migrating to the US. And since then, I have visited Ghana almost more than I've done Cameroon. So I'm almost a Ghanaian by induction by now.
Great. That's very beautiful. And we are privileged to have you because you are one of the greatest professors in the STEM field. You've done a lot, and because of who you are, it's always important that people get to know more of you. And so if you could share with us, if we are talking about Professor Mkem Khumbah, what should we expect? Who is Professor Mkem Khumbah?
Who am I?
Exactly.
So I mentioned I was born in Cameroon, from a small village of the Tika extraction, Fontem, and I lived in Cameroon through high school, migrated to the US for better opportunities. And I've been in the US for more than half of my life now. Did my undergraduate education and graduate school there. When I finished my doctoral program, that's about 19 years ago, when I finished it.
Oh.
Yes, it's been a while.
Absolutely.
I served as a postdoc fellow at UCLA and at UC Berkeley for a year in the mathematical sciences. Then I moved to Michigan, where for the last 14 years, I've been a lecturer at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor.
Okay.
In the process, I've also done a lot of work in Africa. In 2008, the University of Michigan founded an initiative called STEM Africa. So most institutions in the US, they have African American Studies programs or African History, African Studies programs. which have historically been focused on humanities, history, philosophy, African governance, social sciences, economics, and policy issues. Very little has been done in this area of STEM. So we put together a program called STEM Africa Initiative, which we used to enhance or strengthen collaborations and exchanges between our faculty in the STEM areas and African colleagues and policy people. And that has been a vehicle that I've used for the last 10 years plus to strengthen the US-Africa interface in the scientific areas. And that's how I got to come to Ghana very often. And I also served about 3 years ago as the founding curator of the Next Einstein Forum. Then recently I became a senior fellow with the Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils.
That's great.
That's just a few of the things that I do now. But I'm still on the Michigan staff full-time, and I do Africa when I can.
That is very impressive. So it really tells us for the fact that you are the best person to discuss this issue with us, and we are so much privileged once again to have you. But even before we started the conversation, we would want to understand, you know, we've been talking about STEM. It is almost like one of the beautiful pillars of us. It is on our lips, the lips of our government, the lips of our donor community. Africa, if we want to be self-reliant, we need to invest more in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. In reality, how does it feel like? What is STEM? How will we be able to feel the impact in practical terms? You are an expert. How will we be able to achieve all these global talks and the continental talks on investing into the STEM-related areas in Africa? In a nutshell, what is STEM to us as Africans?
Yeah, so that's a key question, because understanding what that means is key to knowing what to do.
Exactly.
So first of all, the word STEM is an acronym. It's taking a global dominance in discourses, only because the US has a bigger microphone on the international scene.
Absolutely.
It was coined in America by the National Science Foundation staff, who were trying to allocate budgets to different fields. The National Science Foundation is the biggest funder of scientific research in the US. So in trying to allocate budgeting, accounting matters, they said, well, this part goes to science, technology, engineering, mathematics. So STEM came up out of there. In Europe, they call it STI, or just ST.
Sure. So, science, technology, innovation. Science,
technology, innovation, or just science and technology. So, but they all mean the same thing, right? As my son would say, it, same difference, right? But STEM just means a focus on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics as engines of the modern economies. So the challenge for us and many who use these words, both not only Africans but just international institutions, is that these words are coined by scientific practitioners, and non-practitioners are using it without understanding that origin, what it means to practice it. It's become a policy keyword, right? UNESCO, United Nations, World Bank, everybody, our governments, AU, everybody says STEM. Now, that becomes valuable to anybody, especially us Africans, only if we produce it.
Absolutely.
If we use it, it makes no difference to us. We are the using end. So who produces the STEM is the one who has a chance to use it, to make value of it for themselves. So if you look at our continent, let's focus on that since we're talking about Africa. About 6 years now post-independence, we've used lots of ideas from outside. Socialism was on the lips of Nkrumah and the independence people.
Sure.
Capitalism came later on. What does it mean for us? Which of them do we practice? How our institutions of governance and our economies fashion to reflect those ideals? Who coined socialism? Some people understood it very well. Are they part of our cultural environment? Are they part of our natural space where we exist? Does it beat in our blood, in our thought process? This is another term that's also coined from outside.
Absolutely.
That because policy people say it's important, we've adopted
without
the vocabulary.
Understanding exactly.
Right? But adopting the vocabulary and putting it in all our policy documents doesn't mean practicing it. So it only makes a difference from us if we look at STEM in terms of being competent practitioners.
Good.
That means you create the knowledge. You understand the physics and the mathematics. You create it, you don't use it. You understand the technology. Look at IT system, the telecommunication systems. I'm not sure who on the continent produces any of them. Huawei, now that everybody's buying, comes from China. Apple, Samsung from abroad.
Sure.
We can have IT in all our infrastructure and all our conversations. We're not producing any yet. It doesn't mean anything to us yet. So in the end, these knowledge systems are only valuable to those who produce it. Everyone else who uses it is a consumer of somebody else's knowledge. You almost always stay on the peripheries.
Sure.
But the one who produces it is the one who understands it and who can use it to improve their own livelihood and environment. And that's why the more developed world, when we say knowledge-driven society, the science-based economies, those who produce it, the person who produced the Apple computer or the Apple phone, he sells it to us at $1,000 and we buy it.
Sure.
His economy is moving forward. The person who produces the Samsung phone, right? All the other technology, that's just a few of them. Every other aspect, they are the ones who talk STEM the real way. So for Africa, the African Union, the AAU here where I am, our higher education system, our policymakers, to have relevance in this conversation, they have to talk about it in a way that they empower themselves to become producers of that knowledge.
Okay.
That's the key.
So currently we are not the producers of the knowledge.
Not at all.
And it makes it very difficult practicing something that you have not really produced.
And not only talking about it, but not practicing it.
Absolutely. So how do we get there?
So how do we get there? That's a very challenging question. It's not a quick response to things like that. The issue is our African context has a challenging political environment.
Okay.
Many of our countries are not even sustainable by themselves. They are small countries. The issue of colonial boundaries has been discussed many times and how it impedes our ability to self-actualize. Pan-Africanism is one of the antidotes to that. And because of that, not only at the political level, at the institutional level, our universities, our research labs, many countries are unable to sustain any of them because of the paucity of resources that exist there and what in the development language are called capacity. Who will do it for these countries? So I think for the move that the AU is taking, the continent is taking, trying to integrate itself as a continent and work regionally and go beyond individual countries' strength and work regionally, is one that can help university systems, ministries of higher education and scientific research to collaborate and share resources. I can hardly imagine any one university or any one country that can host a good scientific equipment on the continent. Neither the manpower nor the money. And at that level, you cannot have good science without it. Almost all the best scientific research infrastructure, either in Europe or nowadays in Asia. So for us to be meaningful in that space, we have to put on policies, allocate resources, recognize that the effort to industrialize, the effort to transform our environment has to include building world-class universities. Not talking about it. Our leadership has seen oil, minerals, extractive resources as the vehicles of economic strength. But those who don't have economic, the countries without such extractive industries, they thrive more than us, like Korea and China, like Korea and Japan, because of knowledge. So the continent, our leaders, the AAU has to make that case. The AAU here, our governments have to see that what you know in your head, what you can create with your brains, the science that you know and you can actually use it to create technologies is by far more valuable than what's underneath the soil. And if we can understand things like that and seek to build world-class universities as the ultimate engines of our societies, then we can make progress. There's a reason why what we call world-class universities are all outside.
Absolutely.
Why our elites, our middle and upper class send their kids were abroad. Why the Nobel laureates come from abroad. Why all the big discoveries don't come from Africa. Those discoveries are what make those countries scientifically competent. If we cannot pivot and see these young kids on the street as those brains that can be the next Einsteins of the future.
Sure.
Those brains that can create the next Google, the next Apple, then we have a longer way to go. But if we can see these kids, even the ones who are hawking on the street, as the brains that can be developed. And how do you develop them? Build world-class universities. Take money away from war, from conflict. Make sure that your universities can compete with the best in the world. Then you start creating that base from scratch. You start creating your own knowledge base that is independent, that can change your own environment, as opposed to always bringing something from outside. Why am I here as a diaspora? Why use expatriate knowledge to develop yourself when you have your own
local or indigenous
people? Well, build the facility, build the universities. Our leadership, I think they do their best. Either their hands are tied, or the systems are so difficult to change that allocating big resources to higher education is very challenging. And I think that's the biggest impediment, as I see. Allocating appropriate resources to higher education, research, and innovation. At least in my perspective, that is the key. You sometimes we would say that we think that we own the oil and the minerals underneath our soils.
The natural resources.
But we don't.
Sure.
The person who owns the technology to get it owns it. We don't own it. It's underneath our soil, but we have no clue what is under there. We don't have a good understanding of the dimensions of our resources. Because we don't even have the tools to prospect it ourselves. So a foreign company, a foreign expert who has the STEM knowledge comes, prospects it, and tells you what he wants to tell you. You go along with whatever he tells you. They put away the resources, you take whatever they give you as change. If we have to change that equation and really be owners of our own resources, we need to grow the competencies to do it ourselves. Otherwise, the talk of having oil and resources is just lack of understanding that having it under your soil doesn't mean you own it.
Sure.
Do that make sense?
You do.
So STEM for us is not a buzzword. For us, in me, it's a key phrase to suggest to both our leaders first and those who support us as international partners to say, pivot your development trajectory towards developing these competencies so that you can build your own countries without using outside help.
Okay. You made a very fantastic point, and you made it so clear that we need to build world-class universities because education is very key. But looking at the challenges that we have, you've even narrated some of the challenges that we have as a continent. How would that be possible for us to make the STEM programs very practical? Because to the best of my knowledge, these programs are being run in our universities. But trust me, go to some of the institutions right now, and students are still learning theoretically instead of going into the practice-based approach, which will give them the soft and then the hard skills for them to do the real work they are supposed to do. How long will it take for this phenomenon to change?
I'm afraid that in my point of view, it will take time. There's a Nigerian comedian who looks at how CNN or I shouldn't say CNN, national media, always make fun of don't show Africa in a positive light, and quickly pick up on our errors. And they say, look, when America was developing itself 200 years ago, becoming independent, there was no international media to expand on their mess-ups.
Sure.
Now, the least mess-up that Africa gets itself into, the whole world knows about it. But there are lots of good things happening that are not being shown that are happening on the continent. There are lots of good efforts that people on the continent are making to make these STEM issues more practical.
Okay.
So one of them is what brought me here this week to Accra. I'm here co-organizing an international conference on the African light source.
Okay.
Now the light source is a generic term for a synchrotron. And a synchrotron is supposed to be the biggest scientific equipment in the world.
Okay. There
are about 50 of them around the world now. Europe, South America has one or two. Middle East has one. Asia, China and Japan, they have, I think Japan has one or two. But there's none on the continent.
Okay.
So one of the things that I've been working with colleagues has been to address this issue of Africa cannot practice advanced science without the infrastructure.
Absolutely.
Our research labs cannot always be second, third, fourth. To talk STEM is to talk infrastructure for it. Now, when you talk about history, you can talk about textbooks, right? Because you read them, it's written.
Sure.
If you talk about STEM fields, it's ultimately on infrastructure. You cannot get our young folks to have the appetite for science without exposing them to what science means. They can hear about it, they will read about it theoretically, but practically feeling it, knowing what it means, you need infrastructure. So we've been working to say something like Africa Science 2.0, going beyond conversation on STEM to actually doing advanced science, frontier science. Africa needs frontier equipment. The biggest scientific equipment now on the continent is the square kilometer array in South Africa. And that's mostly for astrophysics, even though it's generating data and supporting lots of other scientific areas on the continent. But our physicists, you don't hear physics as a big topic. But all these technologies, the science that produces these technologies, the key part of it is physics.
Sure.
Mathematics. Almost every science for us, actually, STEM for us at some point, we just call it mathematics because everything is number and formulas. You have to know the mathematics at the high level. Biology, those things are all things that require advanced infrastructure. If you would do anything called competitive STEM, one that can compete with any other country or any other region of the world. So, to get back to your question, how long would it take? What does it take? It really takes a Herculean effort. Herculean means simply almost doing away with the past and saying that we don't depend on natural resources for our future as a continent, but we now revise our policies, our investment mechanisms to try to produce best scientific infrastructure. So the kids from primary school are exposed to that infrastructure and what it means. They can play with it. They can understand when you teach them physics concepts in classroom. Our curriculums are very dry. We're here with AAU. They would educate me better on what percentage of their graduates in the system on the continent get jobs, as opposed to those who don't get jobs. What portion are in the humanities or social sciences, and what portion are in the STEM? There'll be comments as, well, when they finish school, they don't get jobs. There are no industries. Partly because there are no infrastructure for that. So there are no industries, and kids don't get jobs not because they don't want to. They're hustling, trying to find the jobs. But because they were trained in an environment that was so abstract, so devoid of practical components. Hardly any industries on the continent that are in the STEM fields. Hardly any. If you go to especially the Francophone countries on the continent, and I don't mean this to pick on French-speaking countries. They themselves, they will tell you this. Look at the university system. It's so theoretical, extremely theoretical. I am from Cameroon, and I know the reality in Cameroon. The efforts have been made over there. And universities like Boya, Yaoundé, Gaoundéré, and Douala, they will clarify you with their rectors. Industries don't create themselves out of the blues. And we say industry, is not, there's a service industry where we're very strong on. But technological industries, those ones are where the leadership of the continent can put resources to help our own people create technological industries. The relationship that Africa is having with China recently is mostly been on China coming to construct our infrastructure for us. But could we have Chinese technology come and instead enable us to develop our own technology so we can
train a lot of people.
Exactly. As opposed to just buying their end products. Can, say for example, the Huawei, can they open a production plant on the continent? And while they're producing it, they train Africans on how to do this kind of thing, as opposed to just selling us the end product. So the way this society has been structured, the way we consume external and domestic knowledge and products, it's made us only become recipients
and consumers
of what others have done. and then look at ours as a challenge. Meanwhile, it just takes pivoting resources to start being producers. It might take 1 or 2 generations. It's not a quick fix.
Sure.
And our politicians are quick at short-term fixes because of election cycles. So the kind of long-term planning that is required to say, I would, in 5 years, in 10 years, well, 5 is short actually, in 40 years we can be here. Look, we have independence, what, 60 years now?
Sure.
Well, now 60 years. There's a reason why the AU had the Agenda 2065. Looking at 50 years, long term.
Sure.
Right? But the mechanisms in place, the investment portfolios that would enable science, science, practical science, to be the dominant activity on the continent. That one is where I think would help us be able to become owners of our own environment, owners of our own knowledge systems, reform our curriculum, let our kids know science, not abstractly, but practice science from kindergarten, from a very early childhood towards university. We need to be at the point where people from out of the continent, they come here to study science.
Wow. Okay. So, Prof, listening to you, I'm so much excited because it appears we know the problem, we know the solution, and we know how to get to the solution. And I know a lot of conferences and fora and a lot of trainings have gone on the continent. You hear most of the conferences, then the focus is on STEM. I'm thinking that we've got to a point where we need to go beyond these conferences and talks and move into how we'll be able to mobilize resources and build infrastructure, listening to you very well. Because if we are training people to become engineers, good engineers, they need infrastructure, invest in the universities. Don't you think that as a continent, we need that leadership which will move beyond the talks and then also invest in the infrastructure for the institutions? There we know that we'll be able to achieve that kind of, I don't want to use liberation, but we'll be able to get to where we want to get to as a continent by 2063.
Well, so the problem, I don't think the problem is well known like that. You will be surprised in some circles of policy and power how these things are not well understood.
Sure.
And that's where the ultimate decisions are made, on the tables of power and policy. Those areas, people who occupy those positions on the continent, in my humble opinion, power drives that community, not development.
Sure.
And they're two different things. Power drives their vision, their activity, not development. Now, if we have a development-driven policy people,
exactly,
then you get a whole different agenda. One of such people is President Kagame of Rwanda. And more recently, our nation has produced people like President Acquah Sam here in Ghana and Macky Sall in Senegal, who are development-driven.
Exactly. And
you see the practices that they're doing in their countries. Elsewhere, power trumps everything else. If we are able to arrange our political structures, if the citizenry is able to say, look, we need development-driven leadership, not people who we deify because they're in power, then we can do better. But while power is still the dominant thing on governance, then all these conversations stay on the wayside. Because we understand them, we talk about them, but those who are driven by power don't understand them and don't give it a priority at all. Those who are driven by development, obviously, you see a change in their countries, in their institutions. Even at the level of universities. Some universities produce more than others. Their performances are more than others. All institutions, all ministries. There are some that within 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you see a difference. Some are there for 10, 30, 40 years, you don't see a difference. It happened that at some short 5-year period, somebody who was development driven led that institution. You saw a difference. And as soon as they left, the replacement, that was most likely political, because appointments at these leadership positions on the continent are still very political. You're in the AAU. I'll give an example. For good or for bad, you still have many universities under your system, who even at the level of the department head is by statute appointed by the head of state or by the minister. At the department head level, the head of state is the political person. So are they going to appoint their clients to run the Department of Mathematics or are they going to find mathematicians to run the parallel? These are the political things that are systemic. Now, one might say these are things that were put in 1960 or 1970, and they're no more practiced. They're still in paper.
Okay.
The vice chancellors of the systems are still appointed by ministries who are themselves appointed by the head of state. It's so political. Until we depoliticize these issues, institutionally, structurally, and by constitution, Parliament plays a role to make sure that they decouple higher education from politics.
Exactly.
Then we go around in circles because politics is about power, not about development.
Okay.
Ultimately.
Okay. So, Prof, someone may be listening to us for the very first time, and it may be the first time the person is hearing about STEM.
Yeah.
You are an astute academic. I know the things you've done in the area of STEM. What do you think African academics must do to help the government understand, to help the donor community to understand that, look, if we really want to achieve this development we're talking about, these are the 4 steps we must follow. If you will be able to help us to, you give us 4 concrete steps, 4 concrete points that we should be thinking about as a continent, that if we really want to move away from paying lip service to STEM, these are the 4 things that all the 54 countries on the continent must strive or must work at achieving.
Okay. It's hard to give
a straight jacket one.
Quick answers like that, because these are very systemic things.
Okay.
These are things that a society that has functioned in a certain way to change it's quite challenging. But there are mechanisms that can enable us make progress. So let me back up for a second.
Okay.
It's still about STEM, okay? Around independence period, say 1960, I know Cameroon got independence in 1960. In 1960, only about 3% of Cameroonians were literate. In the colonial times, there was no schools for them, okay? People like Seda Senghor and Nkrumah, they came in, and their task as the continental leaders at that point were to wrestle government away from the colonial masters who were living. Their focus was on creating a bureaucracy to take over governance.
And that political liberation for...
And the other part of it was liberation of the African personality that had already been dominated during colonial period.
Absolutely.
Where we were told were subhuman. So those have been the key, those have been the dominant notions in the minds of our leadership for the last 50 years. So you see, our ministries are all full because governance was their priority.
Sure.
Success beyond measure. Humanities. We've had Nobel laureates like Shoinka in literature. The African art and literature, it's very strong globally.
Exactly.
It was a key emphasis post-independence. Science was not part of the conversation at that time, right? So what some of us think needs to be done now is that in order to bring science to become part of the dominant conversation, so it doesn't matter who is in power or out of power, things are done to strengthen the scientific competence of the continent. The policy system, the political rulers, they create the policy architecture. The university system are the ones that train these STEM subjects.
Sure.
You need an industry to absorb them, or at least you need these graduates to go and create industry. There needs to be a 3-way conversation between those 3 communities.
Sure.
And that is lacking. That is the key thing that we know, at least I know, is missing. There's no one quick answer.
That tripartite
There has to be a
connection.
3-way conversation.
Very important.
If you look at all the meetings, I was talking today with the AAU leadership. You have a meeting coming up. This is the AAU, the leadership of our universities on the continent.
Yes.
There's a meeting coming up
in July.
Look at your roster. You, the AAU. How many people are there from industry? But you're training folks to go to the industry and work for them. The oil industry. Ghana has a GNPC.
Yes.
There's oil in Ghana. There's the oil in Nigeria, Cameroon. The whole West Africa is oil. How many of people from those industries who are supposed to absorb your engineers are in that conference telling you this is what we need out of your classrooms?
Very important.
How many people in the policy in the policy arena, the minister who make policy on what you should teach in classroom? How many are they? How many of them are there in that conversation? So these 3 communities are so dislocated that they don't work in tandem. And everyone on their own side is doing their best but there's no collaboration, no correlation. There's no concrete outcome for all of them. And they all got frustrated. If you talk to people in industry, they complain about higher education. You talk to higher education, they complain about politics. Politics, they complain about, so you get even complain about the other person.
Sure.
But all it takes is to sit down and have a conversation and have concrete plans where the problems of STEM education are co-analyzed by these three communities together, not one versus the other.
Sure.
These three communities have to be on the table together. The problems of what do you do with graduates are co-analyzed by them. The solutions are co-crafted. Everyone is on the table. So you in the classroom, the teacher, the rector, the minister who is making these policies, you know what the industry needs. Not that they send you a piece of paper and say like a memo, send us 10 engineers. In what subject? Right there before you even invest in the equipment in the classroom. You know, this equipment will train these physicists or these biologists to solve this health problem.
Sure.
There is a three-way conversation. So they have to co-create and co-champion the solutions to this problem. Otherwise, whatever anybody else says doesn't quite jive very well, at least in my opinion. You need a three-way conversation. Government, university, industry. They have to be on the same table. They have to be bedfellows in order for Africa to actually make progress in STEM education.
I think you are right, and that is one of the key things that must be done. But we know, like we say, that Rome wasn't built in a day. I know that we've been able to make some strides, and then we've achieved something in the STEMs area. Now, as a continent, what have we been able to achieve? Ever since we came up with a STEM policy, what has been the things that we've been able to do that we think we are in the right direction? So
I would give you a few pointers here. I mentioned earlier that around independence, science wasn't on the table for Africa.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then in the 70s and 80s, the main funders of African development, the World Bank and other institutions, their policy priorities did not emphasize science in Africa and higher education. So we suffered a lot of lag and disinvestment in that area. But recently, in it's about 2000 or 2010 plus, the last 10 to 15 years, you've had major efforts now to put science as a key component of African development priorities, both by international institutions and by our government. So even though we sound like there's a problem, we have problems, it doesn't suggest that there's no effort being made at all or nothing's been done. In the last 5 years, I think, since about 2013, this 2014, the World Bank Africa region has committed over $500 million to science in Africa. Yeah. That's very unprecedented. Sure. I don't have it off my head, but if you compare that to their previous investment in science in Africa for the previous 40 years, this might actually be more than the previous 40 years.
Yes, and you know, most of the donor community, every scholarship that comes to the system is STEM.
It's STEM now.
The discussion is all about STEM.
Everything is STEM. So there are efforts to pivot, not because of Africa only, but they also see that this problem of international development, the problem that Europe faces, that Asia faces, and they say that Africa, the demographics are clear, the economic demographics are clear. Africa is the future. If you don't do this, then the globe will face a problem very soon. So there's been effort. When the African Union, under Chairwoman Madam Zuma, came up with Agenda 2063, they told themselves, in order to get to those goals at the end of the 50-year period, the first step we must take is develop scientific capacity. So the first 10 years on that agenda was TISA.
TISA, yes.
And science was a priority. That was the first thing.
Sure.
And when you combine this TISA agenda, you combine the World Bank orientations, and if you look at almost every government development plan, Senegal emergent, Cameroon emergent, all the emergent plans that science is what all talking about. So there's some consciousness in that, almost but the putting of resources, budgetary allocations in that area is still where more efforts by our own leadership has to be done. It shouldn't take the World Bank to come and say, do science in your country. It shouldn't take somebody from outside to come and say, develop your own scientific capacity.
Invest in this.
Put your own resources. So when you look at the national budget and the allocation, there hasn't been good. For example, look at the military. Our government put lots of money in military affairs. But in some other countries, militaries are the engineers that build a country. So military is not only about war and holding the gun.
Sure.
The military engineering schools can be the one that build their countries. You go to Egypt, the military system is very embedded in the economy and the industries and science. So it doesn't mean that different sectors, our countries are very bureaucratic. Some have as many as 40 ministries together. And they tend to work in solo.
Exactly.
Right? Not realizing that it is the competencies out of the university, the scientific competencies, that will make all those ministries relevant. From foreign affairs to health to agriculture. You don't have the competency, those are relevant. Those are irrelevant. So it will take those governments realizing that even though we have these different bureaucracies, the common thread for all of us to be relevant at all is put common resources in training the most competent scientific capacity through our university systems. But as opposed to letting the university, for example, the Minister of Higher Education, be the only person that's in charge of higher education, but that fits into all the other areas without communication, without collaboration to say, we need engineers, sometimes even positioned in our embassies abroad, so that they can capture the engineering knowledge in that country and bring back to our country. Many embassies around the world have what they call science advisors. It's not even part of our conversation, because if you put a science advisor at the Ghana embassy in the US to talk to scientific institutions in the US, National Science Foundation, Academy of Science, universities, to bring their knowledge back to Ghana, to the government. So working in silo, in my opinion, has been the biggest challenge. Being able to work more collaboratively and realizing that the common thread is STEM capacity. The common thread.
So it still comes back to the point that we need development-based leaders and not power-driven leaders.
Not power-driven leaders, exactly.
That's very beautiful. We'll go for a short break, and when we come, we want to understand how the African diasporans would contribute to the STEM discussion on the African continent, because we believe that they have the expertise because they've gained some knowledge outside the continent, and they will be able to make some input in whatever we do here. Viewers, you are still watching AAU Talks, and AAU Talks is brought to you by the Association of African Universities. We are with Professor Khumbah, and we are still discussing STEM. We'll go for a quick break.
The Association of African Universities, AAU, under the patronage of His Excellency Abdel Fattah Said Hussein Khalil El-Sisi, President of Egypt, and Ahmed Mohamed Ahmed El Tayeb, the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, presents the AAU's Conference of Rectors, Vice Chancellors and Presidents of African Universities from 8th to 11th of July 2019. Theme: Role of Higher Education Institutions in Promoting the Continental Education Strategy, CESA 1625. Call for papers have been announced for the following sub-themes: Promoting Science and Mathematics Education, Expanding Technical and Vocational Education and Training Opportunities, Revitalizing and Expanding Tertiary Education, Research and Innovation, Promoting Peace Education and Conflict Prevention at all levels of education, Improving Management of Education Systems and Harnessing the Capacity of ICT to Improve Access and Quality of Education and Training, Promoting Mobility through Harmonization of Quality Assurance and Accreditation Systems, and Identifying new directions to improve the management of education in Africa. Submit your paper abstracts of not more than 2 pages online at www.aau.org/subs/abstracts. Deadline for submission is 15th March 2019. For further details on CoreVip 2019, please visit events.aau.org/CoreVip.
Welcome back from the break. We still have Professor Mkem Khumbah in the studio, and we are discussing STEM. And before we left for the break, we're going to look at, Prof, the role of African diasporas. What role would they have to play consciously to ensure, because they have the expertise, we know what they are doing outside the continent. When there is any new innovation, you keep hearing a Cameroonian-based, US, whatever, a Ghanaian-based, and sometimes it becomes a bit irritated. But what must we do as a continent to make sure that we bring these people back home, these expertise outside back home, to ensure that we're talking about infrastructural development, we're talking about financial investment, but we believe these people are giants in the economies. What must we do as a continent to bring diasporans back home, if not in person, their expertise or whatever they have?
What must we do? We must have the mindset of President Akufo-Addo, of Ghana, the mindset of Nkrumah, who sees African development as ultimately in the hands of his diaspora.
Sure.
Ultimately, and this doesn't mean discounting people on the front of the continent. As you rightly say, your diaspora, they thrive in global scientific institutions. They are leaders. People like Akufo-Addo and Nkrumah, they understand what diaspora is. You see that in the ideas of the African Union. When the African Union structured its regions, 5 was in the continent, the 6th was the diaspora.
Sure.
They didn't see the diaspora as just me who was born in Cameroon and live in the US. Africa's diaspora, from Brazil to the Caribbean to the US, the Black American runs part of America. It's your diaspora.
Sure.
You understand that? Barack Obama is your diaspora. Can our leaders consider inculcating people like Barack Obama into their development strategies? Or do they reach out to me as their brother who left home a few years ago and can still have close language contact?
Absolutely.
Can come and drink, drink palm wine with them and say, well, we're hanging out together.
Sure.
These are serious issues.
Very.
You have the African diaspora. Currently, the chair of the scientific committee in the U.S. Congress is a black woman. She's the one making America's scientific parliamentary policies in the U.S. It's a diaspora. When you say diaspora's role, are you thinking of people like that? And I mean you personally, our people here on the continent. So we'll look at diasporas in 2 tiers.
Okay.
There's a recent, there's a short-term diaspora like us who come back home with or without scientific reasons.
Okay.
We have family, we have relationships here, we have land, we invest here.
Okay.
Right? So we come here for our own personal needs. We left the continent just short. Well, our minds, our bodies are still here. There's a level where that particular diaspora has been working so hard and trying to be part of the continental development activities. But the communication has not been strong enough to give them a role to play.
Sure.
It's difficult to expect anybody in the diaspora with all their competencies to arrive at an airport and say, what do I do? Where do you start? So some governments have actually put diaspora departments in their foreign ministries to harness diaspora resources to come and help the continent. They've been less effective. I have to be honest with you in this conversation. Many of our governments are afraid of their diaspora. Because the diaspora doesn't all come with a scientific know-how. They come with the ideas of governance on how society should be. And when you're power-driven and not development-driven, you see this diaspora more as a political threat and less of a developmental partner. You take a young, energetic prime minister like Prime Minister Abiy in Ethiopia now, not to look at the diaspora as a threat, but that's a created space for them to come back and invest more on the continent.
As a good partner for development.
A good partner for development. So there has to be that shift of looking at the diaspora as a partner for development, not as a lip service, but as actually giving them a platform. At the AAU meeting that you're having with Curator, what holds the AAU back from having a platform there for US, Africa, scientific collaborations and bring all your scientific diaspora back home? The irony is that there's a broad conversation on these topics for many years now, but in my perception, those who are actually making concrete efforts are the international partners, not even the African countries themselves. An example is the Carnegie Foundation.
Sure.
I know our colleague from who's now in Kenya, Paul Zeleza, and Tade Aina. They are the ones who created the Africa Diaspora Fellowship Program that sends so many African diasporas from the US, Africa born,
back
to come back to the continent to come and spend short term. Why couldn't the African government themselves do that? So this sends about 10, actually they've sent over 100 African diasporas now, African born diasporas academics, to the continent to come and do some work, create relationships, partnership with. But why can't that be institutional? Why can't the AAU itself, this is the AAU, we talking about the government, it's not somebody else, it's the AAU here. Why can't they create a program that would build upon this diaspora fellowship and make it a continental activity? Championed by the AAU, championed by the African Union, or championed by NEPAD. So that we, your diaspora, we have mechanisms for contributing. So it's not a conversation, but there are structural mechanisms. Many even have their own financial resources to support their effort in that. But they just don't, we have to create mechanisms, in short, for them to do that. And go beyond the Africa-born diaspora. Not see them as a political threat, actually create, in the end, I actually think those kind of mechanisms cannot come from the governments. Because again, the politically is still very, very tenuous for much of our leadership. It's been said that in some countries like Sudan, Cameroon, that's now in conflict, the diaspora can be an asset or a liability. Because if they don't support the person in power, they're a liability. When they support the person in power, they're an asset. That political component is still blurring lots of views, right? But there has to be an effort to look beyond the African-born diaspora. The African diaspora is tremendously resourceful, well-financed, well-positioned in the halls of power, both scientific power and practice. We are very willing to work with AAU, for example. Our university system, or any other African institution, NEPAD especially, or the African Union, to put together mechanisms that will channel the know-how of the large sixth region of Africa to support African development. You will observe W.E.B. Du Bois is buried here in Ghana. That was Africa's diaspora. He's the father of Pan-Africanism, and he's the one who helped liberate Africa. You need 3 or 4 of more Du Bois to come here and do what he did. Absolutely. But you need mechanisms. If Nkrumah did not bring him here, he will not be here. If Nkrumah did not go and appropriate or take over this notion of Pan-Africanism, we will not have Africa the way we do today. So the diaspora is our biggest pool. But by not engaging them formally, our leadership, our heads of states, our African Union, our AAU, when they visit the US, not many still have engagement with the diaspora. Go there for political reasons. Meet the State Department. Talk to donors. But your diaspora is there. Talk to them. At least have dinner with them before you go to the meetings with Trump in the morning. You have some engagements with them. We are very willing. And there's lots of us like this, not just me alone, who are competent, who have the resources and the capacity to create those channels, those institutions, where the know-how from the US or from even Europe or the Caribbean can be channeled to support African development, especially in STEM fields. STEM happens to be one area which is non-political. We talk of science diplomacy. Even when the biggest powers of the globe are at war with each other, they're talking science to each other. Because science is the bridge that doesn't know who is black, white, who's right or who's wrong. Who's a giant and who's the least. STEM can be a bridge among many communities. Even in our countries, when there's conflict domestically or continentally, science can be a bridge to those conflicts. By creating scientific teams between countries, between communities, between ethnic groups, you make them to work on non-contentious issues, but issues that are just valuable to their common good. Science is the mechanism that bridges lots of barriers and takes away, as a matter of fact, now that we're talking about it, put science on the table, much of our conflicts will be reduced.
All right, I think you have said everything. There's some questions that I was building in my mind. You've been able to address all of them. And I think these are the strategic things we must be doing as a continent to bring back our diasporans. And when we're able to do so, I believe we'll be able to make a lot of changes and achieve what we want to do. But Prof, before we finally go, I know you are in Ghana for a specific purpose with the Ministry of Environment, Science, Technology and the Innovations. Can you share with us what exactly, I know it's also in relation to STEM, what exactly are you, or what partnership do you have with the ministry as well?
So I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that our continent needs science beyond lip service. And to do science is to build big-time infrastructure. There are a few colleagues, African and diasporas, and the international collaborators who had been wanting to establish a light source in Africa. A light source is the ultimate premier scientific equipment in the world. You know, it serves lots of R&D. It creates knowledge economies, right? And it's not something that one country can do by itself. So there's the African Light Source Initiative that's been led by my colleague from South Africa, Simon Cornell. Sekazi from the US, and Lawrence Norris from the US, among many others. I should mention names here so I don't forget. So I've been able to get the Minister of Science, Minister of Environment, Science and Innovation here in Ghana to accept to assist us in making that case on the continent. That in order to actually have this term become a reality, the continent should have big-time scientific infrastructure. It should pivot its higher education conversation towards infrastructure development. When we say infrastructure, we want roads to run out to as veins and networks in our economy. We want digital infrastructure. Actually, digital infrastructure for us is scientific infrastructure. We also want academic infrastructure. We have no research lab. You all live in the West Coast here. You notice what Ebola did. They list sample, you take it to Europe or to America for observation. My colleagues who are doing their PhD research, they always have to send samples by express mail to some lab abroad. Even the least experiments. So at that point, STEM doesn't mean anything to our continent. Even at that level, you need to send it to abroad. So what I'm here this week doing is to work with MESTI and the government of Ghana. And we're very happy and thankful that the minister himself at our meeting yesterday did convey the president's intention to be a champion for this light source initiative, to make it a continental priority. The light source, the synchrotron, is not something that one country can do or one region can do, especially here in Africa. It will take a consortium of countries, capital investment, huge resources. One light source will cost between $700 million and $1 billion. It's a big-time project. And most of our scientific activities on the continent right now, according to the African Academy of Science, about 50% or more is funded by the outside world, national donors. Africa has to pivot its own resources. So tomorrow we're having a meeting with the Ghanaian Sub-Parliamentary Committee on Science to see how the legislation can support the notion of building big-time infrastructure for science in Ghana. Ghana, we believe in Ghana a lot. It's still our black star.
So I believe with this one, you have the industries playing a role right from the onset.
So we will work with MESTI to put together a team that would bridge those three communities.
That's fine.
Government, university, industry. Luckily, Ghana just discovered oil. Oil is not just what you sell. There are lots of derivative products and material science that can be built around that industry. Derivative products. The chemical industry, pharmaceutical industry. Those things require equipment like the light source to be able to do the research necessary to transform or to build the products that take our natural resources into high-end, commercially available products for our economies. So the Ghana National Petroleum Corporation is one of our partners yesterday. And we talk with them just as one. But we're in Ghana for that matter. Ghana is still a star in West Africa in terms of economic stability, social upward mobility, as an example of what Africa can do for itself now. You look in the neighborhood from Senegal, Morocco, all the way to Kenya. Ghana is still one that we believe in. When we prospect and say, who can do these kind of things? There are many possibilities, of course. But for Ghana to step out and say, we will do it, we're interested in this, we will consider and push the agenda forward, it gives us, goosebumps. It gives us enthusiasm. It says, look, we are the diaspora. We as regular African scientists who just come together and say, let's do this. We can have the ears of our leadership who understand these things and can help us realize it. It's a long-term project, but we'll see how it goes. The seeds are being sown here. We have South Africa with the SKA. Rwanda has been very strong in terms of building its scientific manpower and envisioning itself as the future Singapore of the continent. We have Kenya as the East African community really doing well. ECOWAS has the potential to do that. Senegal is building the knowledge city. So is in Damniajo. Benin is building Seme City. Those cities they call them knowledge cities. We want to suggest to them that the knowledge should be IT knowledge, but also real hardcore scientific knowledge.
Okay.
Those cities should, in the next 50 years, produce Nobel laureates. In order for that to happen, you need this infrastructure.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Prof, for coming. In fact, I've learned a lot personally. It's one of the interviews that I've picked a lot of initiatives out of it, and we are so much privileged to have you, and I believe our viewers have also learned a lot. We wish you all the best in the project. We know we'll have you again.
Yes, I'll be
we'll
around.
look at the STEM, because it's one of the greatest passion of the Association of African Universities as well.
Yes.
So wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Viewers,
Good luck to you.
this is how far time will permit us to spend on the AAU Talks today, and we have been hosting Professor Mkem Khumbah, and he is a senior fellow of the Global Federation of Competitiveness Council, and he has really given us a lot of insight and what we must do as a continent in achieving the STEM policies that we have. Don't forget that this episode will be on our social media platforms, AAU_67 on Twitter and AAU Association of African Universities on Facebook. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Kwesi Sam.